In 2025, as interstellar object 3I/Atlas swings past the Sun, it starts changing color and triggering subtle, terrifying solar anomalies, while a small team of U.S. scientists in Pasadena and Houston slowly realize the object is not just reacting to the Sun, it's talking to it. When 3I/Atlas finally begins answering us back through modulated light and solar flares, the team has to decide whether to keep the conversation going, knowing that every reply might push the Sun one step closer to instability. I need you to remember one thing as you listen to this. On October 19, 2025, for exactly 16 seconds, the Sun was not the color you grew up with. The people who noticed it in real time were pilots at cruising altitude, a handful of amateurs with solar filters, and a boy in Nebraska playing with his dad's telescope on a cloudless afternoon. The boy thought his eyes were tricking him. The pilots blamed the cockpit glass. The amateurs blamed their gear. NASA did not blame the gear, because by the time the Sun shifted back to normal, 3 observatories across the United States had already logged the same impossible spike in its spectrum. It wasn't just brighter, it was leaning, sliding toward a color it had no right to be. If you stay with me to the end, you will never look at a sunrise again as something peaceful. 2 days earlier, in Pasadena, California, Dr. Emily Carter was sitting in a windowless conference room at JPL, watching the first clean images of 3I/Atlas come in. The screen showed a smear at first, then the software sharpened it, stacking frames, stripping noise. The smear tightened into a tiny misshapen dot wrapped in a thin, faint halo. An interstellar object, the third ever confirmed, diving past our star on a steep, almost suicidal path. "Color profile?" she asked, not looking away. On her left, Michael Ross, data specialist, tapped a few keys. "Baseline red slope, neutral coma. Pretty normal for a dusty rock from nowhere." He sounded disappointed, like a kid who'd opened a mystery box and found socks. Emily didn't mind normal. Normal meant models worked, grants renewed, careers stayed intact. But the trajectory wasn't normal. Atlas was coming in steep over the ecliptic, like a thrown knife cutting across a spinning plate. It would pass inside the orbit of Earth, then sling past the Sun and out again. At least that was the plan the math suggested. She leaned closer. "Run polarization," she said. Michael sighed, but did it. Polarization was the boring cousin of pictures. Light waves lined up in particular directions, telling you how they'd scattered, what they'd bounced off, what kind of surface they'd touched. The screen flashed, then filled with numbers. Polarization angle as a function of phase. Ordinary, ordinary, ordinary. Then, at one specific viewing angle, a tiny spike. Not big, not dramatic, just wrong. "You see that?" Emily asked. "Probably an artifact," Michael said. "I'll clean it." But he didn't, not really. He flagged it instead. Artifact? Question mark. At the same time, at Rice University in Houston, Texas, a graduate student named Daniel Price was staring at a different set of numbers. He didn't care about polarization. He was watching timing. That week, the campus observatory had piggybacked on a national campaign to time brightness variations in 3I/Atlas. If the object was tumbling, its reflected light would rise and fall in a regular pattern. Every rotation, another pulse, a heartbeat from deep space. Daniel plotted the light curve and tilted his head. "That's weird," he muttered. The curve wasn't smooth. Instead of a gentle rise and fall, it showed sharp shoulders, like stairs cut into a wave. Too regular, too neat. He shrugged, logged it, and sent the data upstream to JPL. The file landed in Michael Ross's inbox where it sat unread for 14 hours. In those 14 hours, 3I/Atlas crossed an invisible line in space where the sun's magnetic field began to thicken, twist, and snarl. The first real sign that something was wrong with the sun did not come from NASA. It came from a ham radio operator outside Denver who recorded a sudden, ripping growl across the HF bands. It sounded like a thunderstorm eating a modem. 2 minutes later, an airline over Kansas lost their shortwave link for exactly 43 seconds. The pilots logged it as solar interference, shrugged, and kept flying. Space weather is noisy. The sun spits and crackles all the time. It was the pattern that bothered the people who listened closely. At NOAA, Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, a technician overlaid the radio burst on a template of previous solar storms, then frowned. It was too narrow, too clean, like someone had taken a marker and drawn a line through the static. He sent a note up the chain. The note hopped inboxes until it landed at JPL, where Emily was sitting in front of a wall of screens showing the sun in false color, ultraviolet loops, X-ray flares, magnetogram maps of boiling fields. "We've got something brewing," said a solar physicist on a call from Huntsville, Alabama, "but it's not where it should be." The active region on the screen pulsed near the limb, small but intense. It flared a little, quieted, flared again. Emily wasn't looking at that. She was looking at a tiny marker on another map, a dot labeled 3I/Atlas, currently passing behind the sun from Earth's perspective, like a trespasser slipping behind a curtain. "Time correlation?" she asked. "Between what?" the Huntsville voice replied. "Between that burst NOAA flagged and the last clean sightline we had to Atlas." Michael had already pulled it up. The timestamps matched within less than a second. "Probably nothing. Same star, same clock. Lots of things line up." Emily didn't answer. She was remembering the polarization spike, the strange step-like light curve from Houston, the way the models had a tiny nagging error bar whenever they tried to predict Atlas's exact position, as if something was pushing it in ways gravity alone couldn't explain. "Outgassing," people said. "It's just outgassing. It's always outgassing. Until it isn't." The night the sun changed color, Emily was not looking at the sky. She was sitting in her car on the 210 freeway, stuck in a smear of red taillights and brake dust, when her phone buzzed with a priority alert. "Sunspot anomaly. Spectral shift. Attention required." She cursed, pulled off at the next exit, parked in a Starbucks lot, and opened the secure app. The first image was a spectrum graph, jagged lines representing light broken into its component colors. A narrow spike had grown where there should have been a gentle hill. The sun, in that moment, was spitting more light at a specific wavelength than it had any physical right to be. Her first thought was instrument failure. Her second thought was, we don't have 3 independent instruments failing the same way. Because on the other side of the country, in New Jersey and New Mexico, 2 other solar telescopes had logged the same spike at the same time. 16 seconds. Up, then gone. Like a syllable. Like a word. Her phone buzzed again, another alert piggybacking on the first. Emerging corona structure. Unusual geometry. She opened the live feed. The sun layered in false ultraviolet, coils of plasma rising and falling in slow motion. One coil, the new one, rose with eerie symmetry, a narrow loop twisting into a shape that made her stomach flip. It looked like a figure 8. Sideways. Infinity on fire. "That's a coincidence," Michael said later, when the room was full of people and caffeine and the cold air of crisis. Emily agreed, out loud. Quietly, she put the spectral spike, the infinity-shaped loop, and the Atlas timestamp on the same slide. October 19th, 2025, 14:07:13. That was the first time she wrote in her notebook, "It's talking." Of course, that's not how she said it to her boss. In the official meeting, in a secure room with a deadened door and a camera in the corner, she said, We're seeing correlations between the object's position and anomalous solar behavior that exceed random noise expectations. Her boss, a man who had spent 20 years learning how not to panic in front of NASA logos, folded his hands. Correlations don't mean causation. Agreed, Emily replied. But the timing is tight, and the anomalies are getting stronger as Atlas nears perihelion. We have a duty to at least explore the hypothesis. The hypothesis that an interstellar rock is what? Manipulating our star. Interacting, she said carefully. Stimulating, inducing, resonance. Pick your verb. Silence. The air conditioner hummed. Someone's pen clicked twice and stopped. It was Michael who broke the tension. Look, we're not saying it's ET with a remote control, but the light curve, the polarization, the non-gravitational acceleration. This thing isn't behaving like a dead object, and the sun is not behaving like a passive ball of gas right now.
The boss rubbed his temples. So, what do you need? Emily didn't hesitate. Continuous, multi-wavelength monitoring of both the sun and Atlas, priority access to the deep space network, and clearance to coordinate with NOAA, Rice, and the Air Force. And I need permission to send a signal. That made him look up. A signal? Yes, she said. If it's emitting structured patterns, we should try to see if those patterns respond to ours. You want to talk to it. He didn't say it with wonder. He said it like a man reading the line of a budget he knew Congress would hate. I want to run an experiment, she said. If there's no response, we move on. If there is, we have just acknowledged ourselves to something we don't understand. He stood, which meant the meeting was over. For now, just watch. Minimal publicity. No public statements beyond the usual solar weather advisories. If the sun changes color again, I want to hear it from you before I see it on CNN.
By the time 3I-ATLS reached perihelion, 36 million miles from the solar surface, the anomalies were no longer subtle. The sun's corona sprouted narrow, repeating structures like teeth in a gear. Solar flares came not as random bursts, but as sequences, short, long, long, short, that repeated with unnerving consistency. People watching satellite TV noticed the glitches. GPS receivers hiccuped. Airline communications grew spiky. Most people blamed the usual culprit. The sun has moods. It's just a stormy month. Up in the International Space Station, a Russian cosmonaut watched the solar limb through a small window and whispered something into his mic that the translator flagged as religious. Down in Houston, Daniel sat in the darkened control room of the campus observatory alone, listening to the data stream tick across his monitor. The light curves were no longer just steps. They were plateaus of brightness punctuated by sudden, sharp drops at exact intervals. He printed one out, just to see it on paper, and only then did it hit him. The pattern. On, off, on, off. He'd taken a coding theory class as an undergrad. Enough to recognize binary when it was staring back at him from 300 million miles away. He wasn't dumb enough to think this is a message. Not yet. He thought this looks like a channel, a carrier wave waiting for something to ride on it. He uploaded the file to JPL, flagged it urgent, and for good measure texted Emily directly. "Call me, now." She called. He spoke too fast. She made him slow down, walk her through the processing, the checks, the error margins. When he was done, there was a long silence on the line. "You're sure this isn't you seeing Jesus in toast?" she asked at last. "Run it yourself. I'll send raw, but you're going to see the same thing." He lowered his voice, even though he was alone. "Emily, what if it's not just the sun that's changing?" When the first reply came, it arrived in 3 places at once. in Pasadena, in Houston, and in Boulder. Not in words, not in some Hollywood radio chirp, but as a coordinated distortion across the spectrum. Emily's team had decided, quietly, unofficially, and absolutely against their boss's wishes, to send a test pattern to 3I-ATLS. They used the Deep Space Network Array in Goldstone, California. Officially, it was a calibration ping for a Mars orbiter. Unofficially, they pointed a narrow beam just off the predicted position of Atlas, then swept across it. The pattern was simple: a series of narrowband radio pulses encoding prime numbers up to 19. No human language, no map, just math. They sent it 3 times over 6 minutes, then shut up and listened. For 40 minutes, nothing happened. The sun boiled. Atlas tumbled silently toward its closest point to our star. In Boulder, the space weather technicians watched their usual squiggles and drank terrible coffee. In Houston, Daniel half-dozed in his chair, the soft clatter of keys and fans filling the room. At minute 41, every instrument looking at the sun saw the same impossible thing. The corona over one small region brightened with knife-edge precision. A narrow arc rose, intensified, then flickered. Short, 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 long, short, long. It meant nothing obvious, no prime numbers, no SOS, but it was too structured, too clean, too synchronized across wavelengths to be random. Emily stared at the plot and felt her chest go hollow. It wasn't just that the sun appeared to be echoing the pattern they had sent. It was that the lag time between their transmission and the corona response matched the light travel time between the Goldstone antennas, Atlas's position, and the solar surface to within a fraction of a second. It looked, in every way that counted, like a reply routed through the sun. "We poke it, and it pokes our star," Michael whispered. Daniel's voice came over the conference line, thinner than usual. "So, it heard us?" "No," Emily said quietly. "It heard that something bright and noisy lives near this dim little planet, and it chose the loudest thing in the room to talk through." Nobody said what they were all thinking. We just taught it where we are. Over the next 24 hours, the feedback loop tightened. Every time the team sent a pattern, always small, always cautious, always narrow band, some subtle structure in the solar corona shifted in a way that echoed their signal. The sun rang like a bell someone else was learning to play. The public, for the most part, remained blissfully ignorant. There were more GPS hiccups, a few more radio blackouts, another plane over the Midwest logging unusual interference. NOAA issued a mild geomagnetic storm warning and told satellite operators to be ready. The word anomalous appeared in a few internal memos. It did not appear on TV. By the second day, Atlas changed color. Not to the naked eye, no one looking up from their backyard would have noticed, but every instrument measuring its reflected light saw the shift. Its spectrum, once a simple red slope, sprouted new features: a greenish bump, a deepening dip in the blue, like a prism lens sliding in front of a flashlight. "That's not thermal," Michael muttered. "It's not dust either. It's like it's reconfiguring its surface. Or its orientation. Or some layer we've never seen just became active." She knew how that sounded, like she wanted it to be alive. She didn't. She wanted it to be boring rock. Boring rock doesn't talk through stars. Late that night, alone at her kitchen table in Pasadena, she opened a bottle of cheap red wine and a blank document. At the top, she typed, "If it is communicating, what is it saying
And to whom? The honest answer to the second question came faster than the first. It is not talking to us. The delays didn't fit a back-and-forth conversation with Earth. The timings lined up with the geometry between Atlas and the Sun. It was sampling different modes, different frequencies, like a hand running along the strings of a gigantic instrument, learning how they vibrated. We were eavesdropping on a dialogue that had nothing to do with us, except for the part where our primary energy source was being used as a transducer. Heat, light, magnetism, all coaxed into unnatural patterns by something that had crossed interstellar space and decided our star was an interesting toy. The first big flare hit on October 23rd. You remember that day as the one your phone battery died faster than usual, or the day your Maps app lagged, or the day your favorite satellite TV channel went to a blue screen and told you to stand by. If you lived at high latitudes, you might remember the aurora. Green curtains, red spears, ripples overhead like slow-motion waves, brighter and farther south than they had been in years. In Fairbanks, Alaska, people pointed their phones up and cheered. In New York, pilots waiting to take off watched the sky over Queens faintly pulse, just at the edge of perception. At JPL, nobody was cheering. The flare was too big, too fast, its rise time too steep. But it wasn't the size that scared Emily, it was the shape. Embedded in the flare's X-ray profile was a familiar pattern. Short, 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 long, short, long, with new elements woven around it. Long, long, short, short. A modulation of a modulation, not a copy, but an elaboration, an answer to an answer. The models said the flare should have been impossible at that phase of the solar cycle. The sun was supposed to be in a quieter mood. This was the kind of eruption you worried about if you ran power grids or communications networks. The fact that it carried a structured signature was almost secondary. Almost. "We have to stop," said the voice from Huntsville on the secure call that night. "No more transmissions. If this thing is driving the sun this hard just by learning, we don't want to see what happens when we feed it more patterns."
We don't know that our signals are causal, someone else objected. It could be independent. Coincidence doesn't repeat 5 times in matching intervals, Daniel said quietly from Houston. It's learning faster. Emily listened to them argue until the words blurred. Stop. Continue. Control experiment. Risk assessment. At some point she realized they were circling a question none of them dared phrase. If this is intelligence, what does it want with our star? The twist came 3 days later, buried in a dump of raw space weather data. A junior analyst at NOAA, bored and meticulous, had run a cross-correlation between the flare signatures and background cosmic ray hits recorded by a network of ground-based detectors in Utah and New Mexico. To everyone's surprise, the fluctuations in local cosmic rays weren't random. They were anti-correlated with the flares. Every time the sun spat harder in that structured way, the cosmic ray flux at Earth dipped. Not after, but before, as if the solar event were being tuned to counter something else incoming from deep space. Emily stared at the graph the analyst sent her and felt her assumptions rotate 90 degrees. What if Atlas wasn't attacking the sun? What if it was shielding it? Using it as a kind of amplifier, yes, but not to burn us, to deflect something we couldn't even see clearly. A background hail of high-energy particles, a storm riding the interstellar medium, maybe even the leading edge of some shock front from a distant supernova we hadn't detected yet. "It's not a weapon," she said aloud in the conference room. more to herself than to anyone else. It's a filter. "That doesn't make me feel better," Michael said. "We're still the bug sitting on the lens." Still, the idea changed the tone of their crisis. Atlas, whatever it was, might not be a predator. It might be a gardener or a mechanic tuning a machine that just happened to be the heart of our sky. But mechanics break machines all the time. The final spiral began on October 30th. By then, 3I Atlas had whipped past perihelion and was starting to climb away from the sun, trailing a tail that shimmered in strange metallic colors in the instruments, cycling through blues, greens, and deep ultraviolet like a slow, glitching rainbow. It should have been fading in influence. Instead, the anomalies intensified. The sun's output in a narrow band of the spectrum surged and stayed high. Power grid operators in the Midwest were told to prepare for possible induced currents. Satellite controllers shifted orbits, rotated panels, anything to minimize cross-section. Flights over the poles were rerouted. Publicly, it was all framed as routine caution. Privately, people in the know were not sleeping much. On the night of the 30th, Emily stood in the Goldstone control room, a bank of screens in front of her, and watched as the status bar for the Deep Space Network shifted from idle to active. This time, the signal wasn't coming from them. It was coming from Atlas. A narrow-band emission, dead on one of the frequencies they had used days earlier, whisper faint but undeniable above the background noise. "Is it pointed at us?" Michael asked, voice barely audible. "At our antennas?" "At this latitude, this local sidereal time, this beam shape," the DSN engineer said. "Yeah, it knows where we live." The room held its breath as the pattern unfolded. Binary, again. But not just on and off this time. There were gaps, long silences, then rapid-fire bursts. Numbers, perhaps. Some ratio. Some shape. Too much information to decode in real time. Someone started a recording for later analysis. Emily barely registered it, because on the solar feeds, the corona was writhing, twisting itself into loops that mirrored the radio pattern's pacing. Every burst had a light twin, every gap a dimming. The sun and the radio beam were now part of the same choreography. "It's synchronizing with us," Daniel said over the speaker, his voice clipped from the lag. "Or with the system, with the sun plus Earth plus our transmitters." The stakes had never been higher, and the choice had never been clearer. Respond and risk escalating whatever this was, or stay silent and risk what?
Losing the attention of something that might be holding off a cosmic storm, or angering something that had just reached out across 300 million miles to say hello in the only language it trusted. Emily felt the weight of that decision like a physical thing on her chest. No committee would move fast enough. No chain of command would sign off before the window closed. She thought of the boy in Nebraska, of pilots over Kansas, of people in small apartments in Los Angeles and big houses in Virginia who would watch the sky tomorrow morning with no idea that their star had almost been nudged too far. "We send a mirror," she said. "We answer with a transformed version of what it gave us, not new content, just acknowledgement. Like holding up a hand." "And if that's consent?" someone whispered. "Newsflash," she said, more sharply than she felt. "We already consented the moment we lit up a radio beacon on a small rock next to its toy. We're past pretending we're invisible." She nodded to the DSN engineer. 2-second burst, same frequency. Encode the last pattern it sent us, inverted, then go dark. The engineer hesitated for half a heartbeat, then his fingers moved. The dish outside pivoted, lined up with the point in the dark where an invisible object coasted upward and away. The transmitter hummed. A tiny blip of power shoved itself into the void. For 2 long minutes, nothing happened. The radio beam from Atlas cut off mid-symbol. The corona's contortions eased, then stilled. The sun looked suddenly normal. Too normal. Like a wild animal freezing when you step on a twig. "Did we break it?" Daniel asked. On the X-ray monitor, a tiny bright knot flared and died. On the magnetogram, a knot of twisted field lines began to unravel. Somewhere far out, 3i.Atlas changed its tail orientation, shedding its metallic colors like a costume. Its effective cross-section to the sun's wind shrank. It began to dim faster than models had predicted. "It's leaving," Michael said. "Of course it's leaving," Emily replied. "That was always the plan, ours or its." She checked the integrated solar flux. The narrowband excess power was dropping, decaying toward baseline. In Boulder, the cosmic ray monitors registered a tiny uptick. Whatever background storm Atlas had been compensating for would now touch us a bit harder. Not catastrophic, not extinction level, just less softened, like taking the filter off a camera and staring straight at a noon sky. Survivable, probably. "What do we tell people?" someone asked. Her boss, standing in the doorway now, his face drawn, eyes on the screens. She thought about that for a long moment. "We tell them we had a strong solar event, but we dodged the worst of it. We tell them interstellar objects are still mysterious, and we need more funding to study them. We do not tell them we just had a conversation we barely understood with something that might have adjusted our star like a thermostat." "And ethically?" he pressed. "Do you want 7 billion people knowing their warmth depends on passing strangers who may or may not stop by again? On something that can tug on our sun if it wants to? What do they do with that at 3 in the morning when they can't sleep?" He didn't answer. Outside, the California sky was a flat, hazy black, empty to any eye that didn't know exactly where to look. 3i.Atlas slipped away over the next weeks, its light curve flattening, its color returning to a boring, red-tilted slope. Officially, the papers that came out a year later described its pass as unusual, its non-gravitational accelerations as significant, and its interactions with the solar environment as worthy of further study. They did not mention the 16-second color change, the binary modulations, or the night the Deep Space Network listened to a whisper from the dark and whispered back. Unofficially, in late-night emails and encrypted chats between Pasadena, Houston, Boulder, and Huntsville, a different language emerged. One that talked about the tuner instead of the object, about the lesson instead of the anomaly. The lesson was simple and terrible and strangely beautiful. We are not the main conversation. We live next to a star that might, from time to time, be adjusted by hands we'll never shake for reasons we may never be important enough to learn. We got lucky that this time those hands were careful, maybe even kind. As for what 3i.Atlas actually said, encoded in those patterns we recorded and replayed until the hard drives grew hot, that work is still going on. Last I checked, the teams in Houston and Pasadena had found no obvious alphabet, no easy Rosetta Stone, just ratios that hinted at constants of nature, shapes that could be projections of 4-dimensional objects, sequences that might describe fields or waves or paths through interstellar space. Some people think it left us a manual. Others think it left us a warning. Me? I think it left us something worse and better than both. It left us the knowledge that when the sky above your head looks perfectly calm, When the sun rises and you feel its warmth on your skin and you think, this has always been and will always be, you're wrong. For 16 seconds in October 2025, our star bent in a way it never had before because something from far away asked it to. And then it snapped back and we went on with our lives. We drive to work, we argue about bills, we fall in love, we fight, we sleep. Above all that, light crosses a shrinking line between us and a fading speck that once tuned our sun like a string on a cosmic instrument, heard us shout into the void, and chose not to burn us, not this time, but to nod, make a final adjustment, and drift back into the dark. Next time you feel the warmth on your face, remember, you have no idea who negotiated it for you.
Emily Carter did not sleep the night 3I Atlas went silent, not because she was scared, she hadn't yet allowed herself that luxury, but because every model she ran refused to reconcile what they'd seen with any known physical mechanism. A star doesn't mimic radio patterns, a corona doesn't echo prime numbers, and an object the size of a Los Angeles skyscraper does not modulate the spectrum of a G-type star unless something inside it knows exactly what it's doing. So she didn't sleep. She watched the sun breathe in wavelengths, biting her lip until the taste of iron replaced thought. 3 hours before dawn, her phone vibrated with a message from Houston. Atlas brightness spike, again, but different. She blinked at the screen, her eyes raw, then grabbed her keys and backed out of the driveway so fast the tires spit gravel across the street. 20 minutes later, she was inside a chilled JPL lab staring at a graph so unlike the previous curves that for a moment she wondered if Daniel had sent her the wrong file. This wasn't steps or plateaus or binary rhythms. This was smooth, rising, falling, like breathing. "You sure this isn't thermal?" she asked, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Positive," Michael said. "It's too coherent. Temperature curves don't oscillate like this." "Oscillate?" she repeated. He nodded and pointed. "Look at the frequency. That is too low for any rotational signature. It's not spin, it's not wobble, it's something internal." The word hung there, thick as smoke. Internal, as in controlled, as in alive. Emily felt a coldness crawl up her spine. "Run Fourier," she said. When the transformation finished, everyone in the room leaned in. The frequency domain should have shown noise, randomness. Instead, it showed a sharp, narrow peak at a value that made no sense whatsoever, 0.083 Hertz. Once every 12 seconds, the light changed. Not erratically, not with rotation, deliberately. 12 seconds. 12 seconds like a tick of a metronome calibrated by something that knew what seconds were. "Try modulation analysis," she whispered. Michael keyed it in, the software breaking the curve into encoded components. The result flashed. One clean sine wave modulated by a second weaker wave with a period matching the sun's magnetic flux oscillations from 2 days prior. It was referencing the sun, not just responding to it, referencing it, like quoting something you'd heard earlier. Emily sank onto a chair. "It's remembering," she said. No one corrected her. 20 minutes later, the secure line from NOAA lit up. "You need to see this," said the voice from Boulder. The feed showed cosmic ray detectors across the southwest pulsing in strange synchronized dips. Background cosmic rays should be random scatter, tiny bullets from stars dying hundreds of light years away. Except now they weren't random. They were dipping at 12-second intervals. "What's the timing?" Emily asked, her throat dry. Averaged across all stations, the center of each dip is exactly 68 seconds after Atlas's brightness peaks. Light travel time plus what? Plus, the analyst said, something else we can't define yet. She crossed her arms, hugging the knot in her stomach. Cosmic rays, solar resonance, brightness oscillation, all tied to the motion of one interstellar object that, by all accounts, Should have been a dead, frozen relic. But something was happening inside it now. Something waking. She called Daniel. He answered on the first ring. "It's getting faster," he said, without greeting. "The breathing pattern? It's speeding up." "How much?" Emily asked. "It's at 11.2 seconds now, not 12. Emily pinched her nose. "A living organism doesn't shift its respiration rate for no reason. A machine adjusts when it's calibrating," Daniel finished. "Exactly." She closed her eyes. "Look at the derivative. Check whether the frequency drift is linear or exponential." "Already did," he said. "It's exponential." That was the moment she knew something was terribly wrong. Exponential meant runaway. Exponential meant something escalating towards a point, a cliff, a threshold event. Something might happen when the frequency hit 0. When she hung up, she drove back to JPL's upper lab, the highest security one, the one where phones went in lockers and clearance badges lit green only if the scanners liked your posture, gait, and heart rate. Her badge lit green. The door sighed open. Inside, 3 people were watching a solar model twist like digital taffy. "Look at this," Jorge said, a heliophysicist whose usual expression was mildly amused by the stupidity of stars. This night he looked pale. "These waves, pressure oscillations moving through the sun's interior, they're changing frequency, slightly, but consistently." "How many sigma?" 4. 4 standard deviations, not random, not noise, a signal. The sun itself was reacting internally to what? Atlas? Their messages? Or something else? "When did the shift begin?" Emily asked. 40 minutes ago. She did the math in her head. That was the exact moment Atlas's oscillation had begun accelerating. Every hair on Emily's arms lifted. Sun and Atlas were no longer just interacting, they were syncing. 31 minutes later, the first anomaly hit Earth. Subtle, easy to dismiss. A GPS satellite glitched, not failing, just drifting off course by a few meters before resetting. Then another, then a third. Orbit corrections misfired. Clock accuracy drifted. Every system that used precise timing, stock market servers in Chicago, power grid regulators in Phoenix, internet backbone routers in Virginia, hiccuped as if the Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat had missed one syllable. "We're seeing microchronology divergence," Michael said. "In English?" Emily asked. "Something is introducing tiny, repeated distortions in the magnetosphere. Like a drum hit just off beat." She didn't need him to say the next part out loud. The drum was the sun, and the sun was being conducted by something far too small to matter unless size had nothing to do with influence. At 2:14 a.m. Pacific time, 3I Atlas began glowing green, not metaphorically, not spectrally, visibly. Its coma shifted hue like a slow exhale of neon under the black. Amateur astronomers who caught the live streams thought their cameras had auto-calibrated wrong and cursed cheap optics. Professionals knew better. "It's emitting ionized oxygen," Jorge said. "But at this temperature, that's impossible." "What's the pattern?" Emily asked. The green pulses weren't random. They brightened, dimmed, brightened again in intervals now down to 10 seconds. Atlas was accelerating its cycle. 10 seconds, 9.8, 9.6. "If it hits 0, Daniel said over the line, "something catastrophic might happen," Emily finished. Nobody argued. At 3:02 a.m., a sudden, deafening alarm blared through the lab. Everyone froze. It was the deep alarm, the one they tested once a year and prayed never to hear in real life. Solar alert. Core flux anomaly detected. Core, not surface, not corona. The sun's fusion rate had shifted by a fraction so small the public would never notice, but so large physicists felt physically sick looking at the numbers. A star is stable because its core pressure and gravity are locked in a perfect dance. You do not mess with the steps. You do not get to touch the core. But something had. "Magnitude?" Emily whispered. 0.0003% rise, Jorge said. "Small," Michael said, almost pleading. "It's small." A rise, Emily snapped, in the sun's core output means someone just pressed the gas pedal on a nuclear furnace that we live next to. Everyone went silent. On the screen, Atlas pulsed again. 9 seconds. 9.1, 9.0.
A secure call from Washington cut through the paralysis. Her boss, looking older than she had ever seen him, filled the screen. Shut down all outbound transmissions. Effective immediately. DSN is locked. Every array is locked. We cannot afford to stimulate it further. We're not the stimulus, Emily insisted. The sun is. We still shut up, he said. And you, Carter, you're coming to D.C. We need someone to brief the people who can authorize plans if things get worse. What plans? She asked. He hesitated. Continuity. The kind of word that meant bunkers, vaults, airlift protocols. Emily shook her head. I'm not leaving. You need someone here watching it in real time. This is not optional. Neither is physics, she said, and hung up before fear could make her obedient. 4 minutes later, Atlas pulsed again, now at 8.4 seconds. Daniel's voice crackled through. Emily, listen. The modulation isn't just accelerating. It's curving. It's approaching an asymptote. Meaning? It's heading toward a resonance frequency. Her blood ran cold. Resonance was amplification. Resonance was danger. Resonance was a wine glass shattering when the note hits just right. The right frequency could amplify solar oscillations. And if the sun hit a catastrophic harmonic, pull up G-mode predictions, she said. Jorge ran it. The results were sickening. At 7.2 seconds, the oscillation frequency would match a weak but real internal gravity mode within the sun, a mode that could amplify energy transport by a measurable fraction, enough to destabilize localized fusion for minutes, enough to cause a flare orders of magnitude beyond anything in recorded history, enough to kill satellites, burn transformers, blind half the hemisphere, enough, if sustained, to nudge the climate for decades, enough, if perfectly aligned, to end us. What if it's not trying to trigger that? Michael asked desperately. What if it's trying to suppress something worse? Then it's playing with the core like a violin string, Emily said, and we are standing on the violin. She stared at the graph. 7.2 seconds. That was the danger zone. Atlas was at 8.4 now, falling rapidly. They needed to stop it. But how do you stop something whose communication medium is a star? We need to break synchronization, she said suddenly. If it loses sync, the resonance can't lock. We need a disruptive signal. We were ordered to stop transmitting, Michael reminded her. We'll do it indirectly. We're not sending a message to Atlas. We're sending noise into the sun. Through what? Through our magnetosphere. The room fell silent. It was mad. It was stupid. It was the kind of idea you only arrive at when staring at extinction with no tools left. But the Earth had a magnetic field, a huge one, a living one. And if they could produce a strong, coherent oscillation in the field, the sun might pick it up as an anomaly, a mismatch, something that would break its entrainment with Atlas's pattern. How do we generate something that big? Michael asked. We don't, she said. The Department of Energy does. The U.S. power grid was enormous, a continent-sized coil of wire, humming with alternating current. If they coordinated a frequency shift, tiny, harmless to infrastructure, but synchronous, they could produce a blip, a pulse, a heartbeat loud enough for the sun to notice. It was insane, but everything about tonight was insane. She called Washington again. This time she didn't ask permission. She told them, if we don't disrupt the resonance, the sun could hit a catastrophic oscillation. We need a coordinated AC frequency deviation across all Eastern Interconnect stations for 3 seconds. There was shouting on the other end, accusations, threats. A grid-wide modification was unprecedented.
dangerous, possibly illegal. But eventually, reluctantly, they agreed, because the alternative was watching their star vibrate itself into a tantrum that would erase every question except one: why didn't we try? The countdown began. Atlas pulsed again. 8 seconds. 7.8. 7.6. Emily watched the rising tension like a blade pressed against her spine. Grid deviation in 60 seconds, Washington said, over secure channel. You better be right. Believe me, I hope I'm wrong. Atlas pulsed. 7.4 seconds. One more and they would hit resonance. 30 seconds, said Washington. Magnetosphere coupling predicted. Weak, but maybe enough. 15 seconds. The sun on the monitor seethed, loops twisting tighter, glowing like iron in a forge. 10. Atlas pulsed. 7.3. 9. 8. Emily closed her eyes. 7. 6. Everyone held their breath. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. The grid shifted. Every power plant east of the Rockies nudged its AC frequency by a tiny, synchronized fraction. Nothing exploded. Lights didn't flicker. Most people slept through it. But the Earth's magnetic field felt it instantly. A ripple swept outward through the magnetosphere, like a giant, slow drum hit. The sun felt it too. On the monitor, the corona twitched, an almost imperceptible stutter. Atlas pulsed, then missed the cycle. 7.1. It overshot. Then its brightness jittered. The curve stumbled. The oscillation collapsed. The resonance died. Emily exhaled with a sound between a sob and a laugh. They had broken sync. They had interrupted a conversation between a star and something older than their species. But the victory lasted only 20 seconds, because then Atlas did something none of them expected. It spoke. Not in binary, not in radio, not through the sun. It changed color again, this time not gradually, but in a single impossible instant, flashing a deep burning crimson that every instrument registered as a spectral line no element in the periodic table should ever produce. A line that corresponded, when translated through their models, to one terrifying physical quantity: gravitational strain. Atlas wasn't just communicating, it was warning. Something is coming, and we had just cut the line. The crimson flash lasted less than a heartbeat, but the silence that followed stretched so long Emily felt her pulse trip over itself trying to keep up. Every alarm in the lab froze mid-cycle, as if even machines didn't know how to process what they had just seen. The sun stabilized, slightly, hesitantly, like a colossal animal pausing after being startled. But Atlas did not dim back to green, or white, or anything familiar. It held that deep, impossible red, a color that looked like molten iron and human blood, and some spectral creature pressing its face against the fabric of space. "Is it still oscillating?" she whispered. Michael checked the curve. "No," he said. "It stopped. Completely." "That shouldn't happen unless—" Daniel's voice crackled through, with a tremor she had never heard from him. "Unless it received the interruption as communication." Emily swallowed. "You're saying it thinks we responded?" "No," Daniel said. "I'm saying it thinks we interfered. There's a difference." On the screens, Atlas hung in space like a pupil staring straight at the sun. No pulse, no drift, no thermal breathing, just stillness. The kind of stillness predators use before the strike. And then the solar monitors began chiming, one by one. Not alarms this time. Data pings. Readings. Sliding into ranges that didn't belong to any model. The sun's magnetic field wasn't calming after the broken resonance. It was rearranging. Condensing. Coiling tighter. "What is that?" Emily asked. Jorge leaned over the model, his voice thin. "This is a reconfiguration. Large scale. Global." "Triggered by us?" Michael asked. "Triggered by Atlas. But our disruption forced it into a new mode. I think—" He stopped. Emily turned. "What?" "I think Atlas stopped trying to synchronize, and now it's trying to speak directly." Before anyone could respond, Houston broke through the line. "We have visual anomalies on the object. Sending now." The live stream loaded. For a moment, Emily didn't understand what she was seeing. Atlas wasn't just glowing red. It was changing shape, subtly, like a dark crystal softening under heat. The edges softened. Shadows inside it shifted like muscles adjusting beneath translucent skin. It wasn't biological. No one sane would make that leap. But it wasn't inert anymore. Something was moving within its structure, reorienting itself after being interrupted. "It's reconfiguring," Michael whispered. "Why?" Emily didn't answer because in that moment a new waveform bloomed across the screen. A low-frequency modulation. Not light, not radio, not cosmic rays. Something else. Something heavy. Dense. A gravitational wave signature. Faint, but real. "No," she said, stepping back instinctively. "No, no, no. That's not possible. It's too small." "It's broadcasting," Daniel said, "but not electromagnetically." Emily pressed a shaking hand to her lips.
"It's using gravity to speak." She felt her knees weaken as a single horrifying implication crystallized. Something that could modulate gravity at will did not operate on scales humans understood. Something like that wasn't a probe, it was an instrument, and instruments imply a musician. "Run a cross-correlation with our grid pulse," she said. Daniel typed, the keys clacking too loud in the dead-still room. The result appeared. The gravitational waveform was offset exactly by the delay between Earth's magnetosphere pulse and Atlas's last detection of it. It had heard them. It wasn't guessing. It was replying. Her phone buzzed with a secure message from Washington. "Prepare for full-level briefing." She ignored it. The gravitational pulse shifted. A pattern emerged. Not random, not smooth. Stepped. Layered. She leaned in. "It's quantized," she whispered. "Like packets." "Packets of what?" Michael asked. "Information." And then came the moment she would replay in her mind for the rest of her life. The sun dimmed. Not globally, not outwardly, but in a narrow band of gamma radiation that only high-energy detectors could see. A sudden drop. As if something, Atlas, had told the sun to quiet a specific internal process. The gravitational signal spiked immediately after. The sequence was unmistakable. Question. Response. "They're talking," she whispered. "The sun and Atlas are talking, and we're in the way." As if on cue, another system chimed. This time not space-based. Seismic monitors across the U.S. lit up with readings of microtremors far too uniform to be tectonic. They pulsed at the same rate as the gravitational signals. Daniel swore under his breath. "It's coupling into the Earth," he said. "Our crust is vibrating to the same pattern." "Shut down all sensitive equipment," Emily ordered. "If it's using gravity as a medium, we don't know what we might accidentally trigger." But she was already too late. A call from Denver came through. "Carter, you need to see this. Atmospheric density shifts detected over the Midwest. Tiny, but synchronized with the gravitational pattern." "How tiny?" Emily asked. "Microscopic," the analyst said, "but widespread. It's like the air is breathing with Atlas." The room seemed to tilt. Breathing. Again, that metaphor. Again, that wrong, uncanny rhythm. What if it wasn't metaphor? What if Atlas wasn't a machine in the way humans define machines? What if it was something in between? A construct engineered around principles humans had never touched. Living physics. Emily stepped back from the monitors. "Okay," she said quietly. "We need to map the signal. See if it encodes structure." "Structure?" George repeated. "Like language?" "Like intention," she said. Language requires intention. They fed the gravitational waveform into pattern recognition software usually reserved for SETI data. The output took 60 agonizing seconds. When it appeared, Emily felt the hairs rise along her arms. The waveform wasn't random, wasn't chaotic, it was a spatial pattern, a three-dimensional map encoded in temporal oscillations. "What does it represent?" Michael asked. The software rotated the shape. It resembled a funnel. No. A spiral. No. A distortion field. And then she saw it. So did everyone else. It was a curvature map, a topological diagram of how space-time bends under extreme mass. "That's a gravity well," she said. "A model of gravitational collapse." "Like a black hole?" George asked. "Not a black hole," she whispered. "A forming one." This wasn't a warning about the sun. This was a warning about something else out there, something approaching, something massive enough to warp space-time in a pattern Atlas was now projecting to them like a flare. Daniel's voice shook through the connection. "Emily, that shape, that curvature, it matches a signature." "What signature?" Emily asked. Silence. Then Daniel whispered the number. It was impossible. It was obscene. A super-Jupiter mass, hundreds of Earths, moving independently through space without a parent star. "A rogue planet," she said softly. "No," Daniel whispered. "Rogue planets don't move like this. This object is accelerating." The room went still. Accelerating. Objects don't accelerate in empty space unless something pushes them, or pulls them, or unless the object can manipulate physics in ways humans only calculate in thought experiments. "Atlas isn't here to study us," she said slowly. "It's here to warn us about whatever that thing is." "Why warn us?" Michael asked. The question echoed with the heaviness of a stone sinking through deep water. Why, indeed?
Before she could respond, Washington patched through again. This time, it wasn't officials. It was the National Military Command Center. A general she didn't know filled the screen. "Dr. Carter, we need your immediate assessment. Atlas's last emission was interpreted by some analysts as targeting. They believe it may be designating Earth." Emily blinked. "Designating? For what?" "For interaction," he said. "Our cosmic ray sensors have detected directional anisotropy aimed at Earth. That could indicate targeting." "No," she said immediately. "You're misreading it. Those dips were side effects, not targeting. Atlas is communicating through the sun, not at us." "Regardless," the general said, "we need risk assessment on hostile intent." Emily stepped toward the camera. "General, listen to me. If it wanted to harm us, it had a perfect opportunity minutes ago. It could have driven the sun into resonance. It didn't. It stopped. It changed tactics." "Perhaps recalibrating for a more precise strike," the general said. She clenched her jaw. "This isn't a weapon. Not in any sense we understand. It's more like an interstellar sensor relay." "Then why is it emitting toward Earth specifically?" "Because," she whispered, "we answered. We broke its signal. We made ourselves visible." Something shifted on the screen. Atlas pulsed a second gravitational packet. Shorter this time, tighter, faster. The waveform displayed automatically, but this time the reconstruction was different. Not a gravity well, something more terrifying. A vector, a motion path, a trajectory, a line slicing through interstellar space, toward the inner solar system, toward the sun.
toward them. "It's giving us coordinates," she whispered. "Why?" Michael breathed. "Because whatever is following that path will intersect Earth's orbit in less than 9 months. 9 months. A gestation, a countdown, a deadline. And then another pulse, a third, one that froze every person in the room. It wasn't a gravity map. It wasn't a trajectory. It was an image. Not a photograph, not an EM reconstruction, but a pattern encoded in curvature fields. A representation. And at the center of that representation, Emily saw a shape. A sphere. Cracked. Hollow. Like an egg that had already hatched. "Is that the rogue mass?" Michael asked. "No," she whispered. "That's what it used to be." The image rotated slowly. Cracks like tectonic plates splitting across a world-sized shell. Something had broken out of it, recently on cosmic timescales. "That's not a planet," Daniel whispered. "It's a containment vessel." She felt her breath catch. "Atlas wasn't sent here," she said. "It escaped here." Silence. Then the truth fell into place like a trap snapping shut. Atlas is running, and warning anything it finds on the way. As if confirming her worst thought, Atlas emitted a single final pulse, stronger than anything before. Gravitational strain across North America spiked. Seismic readings jittered. The sun flared faintly. And then, as quickly as it had come, Atlas dimmed. The red vanished. The object returned to dull white, inert, silent, as if exhausted, as if hiding, as if the thing it fled from had drawn close enough that even Atlas didn't want to be noticed. Emily realized her hands were shaking. "It's shutting down," she whispered. "Why?" "Maybe to avoid detection. If it keeps emitting, the thing chasing it could trace the signal." Michael swallowed. "Then that means—" "Yes," she said. "Whatever broke out of that shell is close enough to hear." Before anyone could respond, the solar monitors lit up again. A deep rumble through the sun's internal modes. Not brightening, not dimming, a tremor. Like something enormous pressing on space-time from far away. Like a footstep. A cosmic footstep. Emily looked at the model. A new spike appeared on the gravitational spectrum. One Atlas didn't generate. One coming from deep space. One growing.
Atlas wasn't warning them of something approaching. It was warning them that something had already arrived. Emily Carter noticed the silence before she noticed the readings. She didn't realize it at first, not consciously, but something in her body knew. Something older than science and older than fear. It hit her when she stepped outside JPL for 5 minutes of cold night air to clear her head. There were no birds. At 4 a.m. in Southern California, there should have been at least a few, owls, crows, something cutting the quiet. But the sky was empty, deserted. It felt as if the world itself had pressed its finger to its lips, shushing every living thing. She didn't know yet that animals sometimes sense gravitational anomalies before any instrument built by humans. She didn't know that somewhere in the Earth's deep mantle, pressure waves were already shifting. She only knew that the air felt wrong, as if carrying a message her body couldn't decode. Inside, the monitors were alive with colors no one liked seeing. A gravitational signature, faint at first, now rising, was crawling across the graphs. The rogue mass, the thing Atlas had warned about, wasn't approaching slowly the way celestial objects should. It was accelerating. And it wasn't accelerating randomly. It was aiming.
Space doesn't choose. Physics doesn't pick favorites. But this thing was adjusting its trajectory the way a predator adjusts its stride toward prey. Magnitude now at .002, Jorge called out, voice shaking as the curve steepened. That's impossible. That much gravitational change from that distance shouldn't be detectable. Emily stared at the numbers, barely breathing. Unless it wants to be detectable. No one answered. No one needed to. Atlas still hung near the sun, dead still, silent. It hadn't emitted anything since the crimson gravitational scream that had sent every scientist in the hemisphere into panic. It had gone dark, hiding, or conserving energy, or preparing for something. But the threat it had warned about, it was no longer theoretical, no longer distant. It was close enough that the detectors in Louisiana and the South Pole were screaming with data, and close enough that even the sun was beginning to react. The helioseismology feed jittered. The sun's internal oscillations, normally steady like the heartbeat of a giant, were stuttering. Tiny irregularities at first, then larger ones. "This isn't resonance, this is stress," Emily whispered. "From what?" Michael asked. "We're still outside Ceph orbital distance." "Not orbital stress," she said. "Curvature stress." The rogue mass was warping space-time enough to distort the deep interior of the sun. Nothing should be able to do that except a black hole. Except this wasn't a black hole. It was worse in a way. A mobile gravitational anomaly. Something massive enough to manipulate curvature, but not dense enough to collapse under its own weight. A super-Jupiter mass that moved like a hunter, not a body trapped in orbit around a star. And something had broken out of it. That image Atlas sent still flickered in Emily's mind. A hollow world-sized shell with cracks webbed across its inner surface like an egg shattered from within. The lab lights flickered first once, then twice. A ripple passed through the fluorescent lamps overhead like a shiver moving across the ceiling. Equipment whined, oscilloscopes glitching in perfect synchrony. Screens dimmed and brightened again. "Local EM interference," Michael muttered. "But field strength is normal. That doesn't make any sense." "It's not EM," she said. "It's space-time." The gravitational signal surged again. A wave so clean the software didn't know how to categorize it. Not a sine wave, not a pulse. Something layered, braided, like multiple frequencies woven into one. "It's scanning us," she realized. "How?" Jorge asked. "Gravitational tomography," she said. "It's mapping the solar system the way we map organs with ultrasound." "Why?" "To find differential mass signatures." "Meaning?" She swallowed. "Meaning, it's looking for Atlas."
The room went silent. The predator was searching, the prey was hiding, and Earth was caught in between like a small animal crouched between a hawk and a wounded rabbit. Then Atlas flickered. Not bright, just a faint twitch of white, like a dying light bulb gathering strength. Emily's breath hitched. "It's trying to signal," she whispered. "No," Daniel said over the comms. "It's trying not to signal. It's leaking." He was right. The emission wasn't intentional. It was like heat bleeding from a wound, an involuntary twitch from something holding itself back. Atlas wasn't waking up. It was struggling. A second gravitational footstep landed, stronger, closer. You couldn't hear gravity, but the building shook anyway, as if the building itself wanted to recoil. The seismic monitors lit up across the west coast. The tremor wasn't tectonic, it had the wrong frequency, too low, too broad. "It's causing earth tides," Jorge whispered. "Like the moon, if the moon weighed 1,000 times as much." The rogue mass was still far outside the heliosphere, and it was already tugging on Earth. The sun dimmed again in high-energy wavelengths, a soft collapse in gamma emissions. Atlas had triggered that same pattern earlier, but this wasn't Atlas. This was the hunter. The sun recognized the touch. It recoiled.
Plates of magnetic field twisted like a wounded animal curling away from a hand that had hurt it before. "What did this thing do to the last star?" Michael whispered. No one answered because everyone knew exactly what it had done. Then something new appeared on the monitors, something no one expected. A second gravitational signature. Smaller, lighter, but smart, coordinated. "There's two objects," Daniel breathed. "The hunter and a scout." A scout? Something like a secondary system, a sensor drone. But the mass is wrong. How wrong? "About the size of Earth's moon," he said, "but it's as dense as a collapsed dwarf core." That wasn't a scout. That was a weapon. The smaller anomaly shifted course sharply, too sharply for anything natural. It was angling directly toward Atlas. Straight shot, a clean intercept. "Time to arrival?" Emily asked, her throat tight. Daniel whispered, 9 days, if it doesn't accelerate again. And it would accelerate again. They all knew it. Atlas flickered once more, brighter this time, the silver-white glow shimmering like moonlight through fog. Not a message, a reflex. Something pressing against its structure from inside, something draining it, suffocating it. The sun pulsed in response, not bright, dim, as if a shadow passed across its heart. Emily felt nausea rise. "It's communicating through the sun again," she whispered. "But the sun is trying to block it." "Block it?" Michael repeated. "Why would the sun block Atlas?" "It isn't blocking Atlas. It's blocking the scout from hearing Atlas." The sun, terrified of the hunter, was muffling Atlas like a mother pressing a child's face into her chest to hide its cries. Atlas dimmed. The glow faded, went silent again. A third gravitational footstep landed, closer, big enough to register on every deep underground detector. People in Los Angeles felt it as a subtle dizziness. Birds across the state flew in erratic spirals. Dogs howled at empty sky. And then Atlas pulsed gold. It wasn't bright, invisible light, but the gravitational spectrum lit up with a warmth Emily had never seen in data. A softening, a smoothing, a damping of solar turbulence. "What is that?" Michael whispered. "It's soothing the sun," she said. "Why?" "To stabilize it, to keep it quiet." The hunter's next wave hit like a hammer. The sun buckled slightly, magnetic field lines rippling outward. Atlas countered, flaring gold again, diffusing the shock. Atlas was fighting, quietly, desperately, and Earth was watching a cosmic boxing match between a dying messenger and whatever horror had crawled out of that shell. Atlas dimmed again. The gold flicker guttered. Its structural coherence readings dropped sharply. "It's dying," Jorge said. "It's burning itself out, protecting the sun." Emily pressed her fist to her lips. "It's buying time," she whispered. "For us." Then everything went dark. Atlas's light, the gravitational pulses, even the sun's tremors paused as if holding its breath. The silence was so sudden it felt surgical. "Where did it go?" Michael whispered. "Is it dead?" "No," Emily said. "Something is covering it." The rogue mass had extended a gravity veil, a smothering field, a cloak. It was hiding Atlas from the sun. It was hiding Atlas from Earth. It was isolating it. A predator, isolating prey. Atlas flickered inside the veil. Once. Twice. Silver. 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 A final message. Directed at Earth. Not the sun. Not the hunter. The translation took 4 seconds. 4 seconds too long. But when the words appeared on the monitor, Emily felt her heart slam into her ribs like a fist. Do not let it hear you. Washington called instantly. The president was on another line, the Pentagon on another, but Emily didn't hear them. She stared at the message from something that had traveled light years to warn them, something dying right now under the gravitational fist of its hunter. The sun trembled again, harder. The hunter was adjusting course. The scout was accelerating. The gravitational signals were tightening like the narrowing coil of a snake. Emily, Dryden Hayes, said in her ear, "What the hell does that message mean?" And she finally understood. "It's not hunting Atlas anymore," she whispered. "It's hunting intelligence. Anything that emits in patterns, anything that listens, anything that speaks." She looked at the Deep Space Network, at the radio telescopes, at the planetary radar arrays, at Starlink swarms, at every beacon humans had ever built to shout into the dark. "Shut it all down," she said. "Every transmitter, every telescope, every array, every satellite that can emit. Shut down Earth's voice." "You can't be serious," Hayes said. Emily stared at Atlas's fading silver pulse. Its last breath, its last warning. "If it hears us," she whispered, "we become the next shell." Emily Carter didn't remember sitting down. She didn't remember standing up. She didn't remember the moment she realized her hands were shaking so hard she could barely touch the console. All she remembered was the message burning on the monitor in front of her, the one that Atlas had carved into the gravitational of its veil. "Do not let it hear you." The words felt radioactive, as if reading them out loud might summon something from the dark. She whispered anyway, breath thin and horrified. "Shut it down, everything." The order traveled through JPL like a shockwave, then through NASA, then through every military channel in the country. Within minutes, the United States began silencing itself. Within an hour, the world followed. Telescopes folded like terrified animals curling inward. Radio transmitters fell quiet. Deep Space Network antennas rotated down, their broad white faces turned to the dirt like a sign of submission. Radar arrays powered off. Tracking stations cut their links. Satellites muted their beacons. Earth, wired, bright, loud Earth, began to go silent for the first time since the invention of electricity. And still, it didn't feel fast enough. The gravitational readings sharpened. The Scout, the smaller collapsed core object, was accelerating again, burning across the inner solar system on a trajectory that made no physical sense. Orbit mechanics should have bent it. Solar wind should have slowed it. But nothing slowed it because nothing controlled it except whatever intelligence had birthed the hunter in the shell of that hollow giant. 9 days to arrival became 8, then 7, then 6.5, and the hunter, still far beyond the heliosphere, was closing too, folding the fabric of space like someone dragging a heavy hand across a bedsheet. Its approach wasn't elegant. It was hungry. Atlas was still in the veil, hidden, and dying. Emily stared at the patch of solar space where it hung, a dark gap in the data where nothing came through. It wasn't dead yet. She knew that. She felt that, the same way you know someone is still breathing even through a closed door.
The sun trembled every few minutes, small pulses of magnetic frustration, tiny spasms of light, and each time Atlas responded through the veil with a soft gravitational hum, the cosmic equivalent of whispering, "I'm still here." But the hums were getting weaker, slower, like the heartbeat of someone slipping into a coma. Washington was in chaos. The president ordered NASA to prepare evacuation scenarios, not for Earth, but for satellites. He said, "We can't leave anything up there, if it emits even a whisper." But they couldn't bring everything down, not in time, not safely, not while the world was shutting off its own infrastructure like an animal chewing off its leg to escape a trap. Europe went dark second.
Japan third, Australia fourth. The Middle East took longer, fighting over whose satellites could be temporarily muted without sparking war, but the threat was too large, too incomprehensible, too undeniable. Within 13 hours, humanity, the loudest species the Earth had ever known, fell nearly silent. Nearly. Not fully. Because two countries refused, on principle, on pride, on the kind of human arrogance that has killed civilizations long before ours. Russia kept one deep space radar open for national security. China kept one polar orbit tracking station online for defense integrity. Emily stared at the blinking red icons on the global emissions map like they were open wounds. "If that thing hears them," Michael whispered. "It's not them it hears. It's us. It's life." The scout surged again. 5 days. 4. 3.5. And then the hunter shifted. It wasn't a wave this time, not a footstep, not a pulse. It was something like a voice. Not sound. Gravity. A gravitational oscillation so complex, so layered, so cold, it made the human nervous system respond with primal terror. Evolution doesn't prepare you for something like that. It felt like standing too close to a wild animal and realizing too late that it wasn't looking at the forest, it was looking at you. Humans weren't built to feel space-time being shaped with intent. Intent is scarier than mass. Intent means it knows you exist. The sun dimmed, hard. A fast drop, a flicker, so sharp the photosphere rippled like the surface of a lake hit by a stone. Satellites registered the collapse before anyone on Earth saw the visual dip, but millions of people saw the lights change. Street lamps flickered, shadows shifted, animals screamed. And Atlas responded through the veil. Not weakly, not trembling, not dying, but violently. A pulse erupted from its location, not light, not heat, gravity. A focused spike that tore through the veil like a fist breaking a cage. Emily gasped, stumbling backwards as the instruments blew past safety thresholds. "It's fighting," she whispered. "It's fighting back." Against the hunter? She shook her head. No. Against the scout. The smaller object, the weapon, jerked wildly off course, its artificially smooth curve suddenly spasming like something struck mid-flight. The gravitational signature flared, crumpled, warbled. The scout was struggling to correct itself. Atlas had hit it, hard. The sun responded instantly, flaring in sympathy, releasing a sharp burst of magnetic energy like a mother screaming for her child. Atlas pulsed again, harder. Emily understood. It wasn't attacking the scout to save itself, or even the sun. It was attacking because the scout had gotten too close to Earth. That was the line. That was the trigger. Atlas could tolerate dying under the hunter's veil. It could tolerate being smothered, drained, crushed, but it would not tolerate Earth being next. The scout stabilized for a moment, then surged, straight towards Atlas. It wasn't heading for the sun. It wasn't heading for Earth. It wanted Atlas. It wanted the prisoner that had escaped the hunter's shell. And Atlas did something no one expected, no model predicted, no human imagined. It ran. A comet-like object, dead, broken, dying, accelerated so fast it left a rippling smear of gravitational lensing behind it like a wake behind a ship. Nothing with mass that large should have been able to move like that. Nothing should have been able to outrun a collapsed core weapon. But Atlas wasn't outrunning it. It was luring it. Away from the sun. Away from Earth. Into deeper, emptier space. The hunter felt it instantly. Its signature flared, cold, furious, and the whole solar system shivered as it altered course mid-stride. It was coming, faster, harder.
the stars themselves bending around its invisible bulk. "Emily," Jorge whispered, "where is Atlas going?" She didn't answer, couldn't answer, because she understood something the moment the trajectory snapped into place, something horrifying, something beautiful, something tragic. Atlas wasn't running towards safety. Atlas was running towards death, and it was choosing where to die. A place where the explosion, even gravitational, would be dampened, a location where gravitational curvature was already extreme, a region where the signature would vanish instantly, the heliosphere's boundary, the solar system's edge, a known void, a gravitational desert, the Oort discontinuity, a natural burial ground. It wanted to keep the hunter from detecting Earth's position after its death. It was choosing a place where its final pulse would echo into emptiness instead of towards us. Jesus Christ, Michael breathed. It's sacrificing itself. Emily felt tears in her mouth before she realized they were on her face. The scout reached Atlas first. They collided in a flare of gravitational distortion so violent every detector on Earth spiked. The signal wasn't light, it was curvature ripping like cloth tearing under stress. A scream, a cosmic scream. The sun recoiled, collapsing slightly inward like it had been slapped. Earth's core vibrated in harmonic tremors, deep and low, like the groan of a dying giant. Atlas's signature bled, spilled, flickered like a candle about to go out. But it didn't go out yet. It spoke. Not in English, not in radio, in gravity. A final gravitational whisper, a shape of meaning carved into space-time. The translation rendered slowly, too slowly. The hunter was accelerating, closing, raging. Emily stared at the translated sentence as it materialized, pixel by pixel, letter by letter. "We were like you." Her breath stopped. Her heart stuttered. Another line. "We reached out." She felt the room spinning. A third. "They heard us." Emily pressed a hand to her mouth as the final line appeared. "Do not listen for voices in the dark." And then Atlas died. No explosion, no flash, no debris, just absence. A silence so vast the solar system felt wrong, unfinished, missing a piece of itself. The scout died with it, collapsing into a dead husk of inert matter drifting into the void. The hunter screamed. Not sound, gravity. A shockwave that twisted the outer edge of the solar system like a fist closing around a throat. It realized what Atlas had done, what Atlas had ruined. It had lost the signal, lost the scent, lost the prey. And then, miraculously, impossibly, it stopped. The hunter held still in the dark for an agonizing hour. Another, then two, as if searching the void, tasting the silence, listening for something, anything that might betray Earth's living breath. But Earth was silent. The solar system was silent. Humanity was silent. Eventually the hunter turned, slow, uncertain, animalistic, and walked back into the dark between stars. Not defeated, not gone, just leaving. For now. Hours passed before anyone spoke above a whisper. Emily stood in the control room long after everyone left, staring at the empty monitors, feeling the weight of Atlas's final message resting like a stone inside her chest. "We were like you. We reached out. They heard us." When morning came, sunlight poured through the windows of JPL. Warm, ordinary, blissfully normal. And for the first time in her life, Emily Carter looked at the sunrise and felt afraid, not of the light, but of what might someday answer it.
Humanity had always believed that silence was loneliness. Now it understood the truth.